views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
So what is at stake is our democracy.
Tonight on Politics Now, a vote to move forward with the impeachment inquiry. We have analysis from Washington, D.C. and Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan on what happens next. And
Nevadans expect and deserve action when an issue of this gravity is identified.
wiping the slate clean, what the Pharmacy Board did that had Governor Steve Sisolak up in arms and what he's doing to fix it. Plus,
if I am known as somebody that kind of got the ball rolling here, I'll take it.
government investigations into UFOs. The I-Team's George Knapp talks to Senator Harry Reid to reveal the current state of the Department of Defense programs and what they may look at next.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius.
An upset Governor Steve Sisolak called a press conference to announce the State Pharmacy Board had not been doing required background checks, and he said he was making changes. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Sebelius. Sisolak said the State Pharmacy Board had failed to do the required checks on distributors who deliver drugs to pharmacies since 2007. But the board was still collecting the fees associated with those checks. The information came after a month-long investigation into the fingerprints of license applicants.
I would be lying if I said I wasn't shocked when I learned of this issue and the fact that it had taken place for so long without being addressed. Nevadans expect and deserve action when an issue of this gravity is identified. And there comes a point when simply ignoring or discussing a long-standing problem ends and the responsibility to take swift action begins.
Sisolak's office did not specify how many licenses were not completed. Sisolak says he plans to name new members to give the board a fresh start. Former Nevada Senator Harry Reid says he's enthusiastic about reaction to a once-secret study of UFOs that Reid and congressional colleagues authorized more than a decade ago. The last 2 years have seen an explosion of interest in UFOs among mainstream media, but there's been pushback from conspiracy enthusiasts and some military officials. Reid gave an exclusive interview to the I-Team's George Knapp to try to clear up some misinformation.
When Bill and Hillary Clinton came to Las Vegas in May to speak to a large audience on the Strip, their first stop was at the Henderson home of former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. It's the same path followed by many Democratic politicians and presidential candidates who visit Nevada, seeking guidance from the retired but still crafty senator. Reid and the Clintons share an interest in a controversial subject:
there's a whole fleet of them.
UFOs. As a presidential candidate in 2016, Hillary Clinton vowed to open up the Pentagon's UFO files. And when Bill Clinton was still president, Reid asked him about UFOs during one White House visit.
Someone else who had an interest in this that you discussed it with is Bill Clinton. I don't know. We can now talk about this, maybe.
Bill is a. One thing about President Clinton, no one can ever say that he wasn't smart. He is and was an extremely intelligent man. And this is something that he was interested in.
Reid was cagey about whether the Clintons spoke to him about UFOs during their recent visit, but said the subject is definitely on the agenda for their next get-together. Reid had similar conversations with other national figures during his years in the Senate, including Senators Stevens and Inouye, who lent their support to the creation of a secret Pentagon study of UFOs, and Senator and former astronaut John Glenn.
Did he ever give you any specifics about why he was interested?
No, but I didn't want to push him, but he was very interested.
The UFO study that Reid initiated was largely carried out by a Nevada contractor, Bigelow Aerospace. After the contract ended, a scaled-down version of the program continued within the Pentagon, ATIP. In a 2009 letter to the DoD, Reid tried to move ATIP into a more classified special access status. The sensitive letter was sent to only a handful of people, one of whom was a career intelligence officer named Lou Elizondo. ATIP was one of his Pentagon assignments. In 2010, Elizondo became the point man for ATIP, though in recent statements, Pentagon spokespersons deny he ever worked for it. UFO critics have pounced on those claims. Reid says he's appalled but not surprised.
We have a fringe group of people out there who they want to control this so-called conspiratorial folks. They don't want anybody that's based on facts being involved in this. So what do? They go online and try to belittle Elizondo and me and anybody else that's trying to do it a scientific way. Elizondo is a man with a great record serving our country, and people should leave him alone. And one thing about him, he's not backing off, and I appreciate that very much.
Would you say definitively that he was working for ATIP trying to figure out this UFO stuff?
That's one of the things he did, yes.
Yeah.
Although the Pentagon says ATIP ended in 2012, Reid has been informed it is ongoing with greater resources than it had before. The U.S. Navy's announcement that it will encourage UFO encounter reports by pilots and others is a key development, Reid says, an indicator the subject is no longer taboo or a career killer. The ongoing wave of media interest has even convinced Reid's most formidable skeptic, Mrs. Reid.
So my wife said, maybe you aren't so crazy after all.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
Yeah, I know.
The House of Representatives this week voted to move forward with the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump. The Nevada delegation voted along party lines. Democratic Representatives Dina Titus, Stephen Horsford, and Susie Lee voted to approve the resolution. Our lone Republican in the House, Mark Amodei, voted against it. Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexander Limon explains what the vote accomplishes and how it will shape what happens next.
The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
The vote in favor of moving forward with the impeachment inquiry was mostly along party lines.
So what is at stake is our democracy.
The resolution makes the impeachment investigation official and establishes a set of rules under which both parties will operate.
Up until now, President Trump and Republican lawmakers called the impeachment inquiry a sham because the House had not voted on the issue and because the testimony took place behind closed doors. This vote addressed both of those issues.
This resolution sets the stage for the next phase of our investigation, one in which the American people will have the opportunity to hear from the witnesses firsthand.
But Republicans like California Congressman Devin Nunes still object.
It's clear that since the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives, they have always intended to transform the Intelligence Committee into the Impeachment Committee.
On Twitter, President Trump called the impeachment inquiry a hoax and said it's hurting the stock market. Once the impeachment investigation is completed, the matter will head from the House Intelligence Committee to the House Judiciary Committee. That committee will decide if the House of Representatives will file and vote on articles of impeachment against President Trump. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Now that the vote is in the books, the inquiry moves to its next and more public phase, in which we'll learn about a lot more about what's been said in those closed hearings. So I asked Alex Limon, what's going to happen now?
It's also going to move the impeachment inquiry into a more public phase where we may now hear from witnesses testifying in public hearings.
So, Alex, what type of information are we talking about specifically? Recap for us, if you would, what this impeachment inquiry really revolves around.
Yeah, at the heart of this impeachment inquiry is a phone call that happened between President Trump and the president of Ukraine. The White House released what they said was a summary of that phone call. And in that summary, you can see that President Trump talks about all of the things that the U.S. does for Ukraine, all of the ways that the U.S. helps that country. And President Trump says that Ukraine doesn't reciprocate that help, and then the president moves on to asking Ukraine's president to investigate his political rivals. So one example of the testimony that lawmakers heard this week was a witness who said he heard that phone call himself, and he said that a lot of the references to Joe Biden and his son and asking Ukraine to investigate the Bidens were actually left off of the summary that the White House released publicly.
This resolution that was adopted, not just the public process, but it also allows for more time for the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, to ask questions. It also gives more subpoena power to the ranking members of the Intelligence and the Judiciary Committee. That's obviously aimed at Republican complaints that this was not a due process inquiry. Is that going to resolve some of those questions, you think?
Well, I think that was the goal that Democrats were aiming for with this vote. It's really going to hopefully add a lot of kind of clarity and structure to the way that this impeachment inquiry moves forward, because now they have this agreed set of rules under which everybody will be operating. You know, how long will people get to question witnesses? Who has subpoena powers? And it should hopefully also resolve some of those issues that Republicans have as far as what they get to do as part of trying to defend President Trump.
Well, up next, more on the impeachment process and the rule changes that benefit the minority party in the House.
Republicans will be empowered to have more tools at their own disposal. It gives them subpoena power. They can call their own witnesses.
I speak with Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan about what directions the inquiry could take. That's
At Tobin Kia. See you when you get here.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
So what will we learn about the people testifying about impeachment before those House committees? I asked Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan about it. Yesterday, we heard from Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. What impact do you think his testimony is going to have? He revealed that the transcript that was released by the White House that contained references to Joe Biden actually contained more references than we'd been allowed to see up to this point, talking about not only Joe Biden, but also Burisma Holdings, the company that his son Hunter Biden was working in over in Ukraine.
Right. This memorandum of the phone call is at the center of this because it shows the president's direct involvement in what we have heard through at least 5 or 6 testimonies from U.S. officials put under oath in these depositions who have said there was a quid pro quo. Or at least an understanding that a White House meeting and the release of aid to Ukraine was dependent on that government opening it up an investigation into a company that had ties to the Bidens. And so that was one thing contingent on another. That looks like a quid pro quo. The White House and President continued to say that that didn't exist because you didn't see it spelled out exactly in the memorandum that was released publicly, what the President calls a transcript. But what you heard under oath, or what we have been informed of in terms of what the Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified to behind closed doors, was his recollection of hearing the call of saying that it wasn't an exact transcript and that in fact, the one thing in exchange for the other. The do us a favor, though, was specifically in reference to this company that Hunter Biden served on the board of. That makes it harder for the administration to say, look, President Trump is just interested in rooting out corruption, when the only specific reference was to a company with some ties to his main political rival's son. That looks more political than it does principled attempts to root out corruption.
Do you think, Margaret, up until now, a lot of these things have been going on behind closed doors. Reporters have been trying to ferret out what's been discussed in those closed-door hearings. Do you think with more public hearings, members of the public and maybe members of the Congress, specifically the Senate, who have spoken anonymously saying, you know, we're concerned about this, this is, one described it as a nightmare, do you think that that will change what is discussed about it, the public mood about it, and maybe some of the people in Congress who have been reluctant to speak about it up till now?
Well, look, there are some Republicans in the Senate, which, remember, remains under Republican control. Therefore, it is a harder case to make to allies of the president to break with him and vote to convict him, because we are assuming that in the House, which is controlled by Democrats, that along partisan lines, this will be articles of impeachment that do go forward, do get voted for, and then a trial would start in the Senate. That is where the due process would be, the trial in the Senate. It is going to be harder for Republicans to publicly comment on some of the fact patterns that are being discovered in these depositions. When you have, as you brought up, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, someone who served this country as a public servant, a Purple Heart recipient from the war in Iraq, someone who appears to be of, unimpeachable character in terms of his patriotism and service to this country, saying, no, I heard it. I heard it too. And in fact, I went to lawyers because I was so concerned. Those kind of first-person accounts are damaging to the president's argument, and they do make it more difficult for his Republican allies to stand up and defend him on the content. That's why we hear so much argument about process and votes and whether the doors are open or closed. So once you see the public part of this begin, it again weakens that argument that this is overly secretive. And so that takes away another talking point from Republicans. But what we also saw today with this resolution was that Republicans will be empowered to have more tools at their own disposal. It gives them subpoena power. They can call their own witnesses. They can ask for transcripts of things that may not even have anything to do with Ukraine, but could be useful to the president and to his position that at the end of the day, he thinks all of this is just a witch hunt, that his behavior isn't what's being scrutinized, but rather the election itself. That is how Republican allies of the president are framing it right now, that it is an attempt to overturn an election. The impeachment inquiry is specific to the behavior right now, narrowly defined around whether there was this quid pro quo.
Well, you can watch Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation every Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. right here on 8 News Now, and you can watch the rest of that interview with Margaret on our website at 8newsnow.com. Well, coming up, Twitter is banning political ads.
My immediate reaction is it's the wrong move.
The latest move by the social media company while it grapples with how to handle the political season and fact-checking. And another judicial nominee comes under fire. What caused this former Nevada Solicitor General to start sobbing in his Senate hearing?
Champions kicks off Tuesday at 6. You're watching Politics Now.
The Nevada Supreme Court chose to not weigh in on drugs the state uses during executions. The drug maker Alvogen sued to stop the state from using its drug in the execution of Scott Dozier. Dozier later committed suicide, but both Alvogen and the state asked the Supreme Court to make a ruling for future executions. However, the court said it's not a viable issue, and they'll have to take it up the next time someone is about to be executed. Well, one of President Donald Trump's picks for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals was grilled by a Senate committee this week. The nominee, Lawrence Van Dyke, is the former Solicitor General of Nevada under then Attorney General Adam Laxalt. This is video of his hearing on Wednesday when he broke down into tears. Democrats, including both of Nevada's senators, have criticized the pick over his ideological leanings and because they were not consulted by the White House about the selection. Republicans have said those are just partisan attacks and Van Dyke is very qualified. But Van Dyke was rated as not qualified by an American Bar Association committee. Their assessment said, quote, Mr. Van Dyke is arrogant, lazy, an ideologue, and lacking in knowledge of the day-to-day practice, including procedural rules, unquote. Van Dyke told the committee that he was very hurt by the rating, and Republicans on the committee came to his defense during the hearing. Well, heading into the 2020 election, social media companies are under the microscope for their ability to spread misinformation. Twitter has announced it is dropping all political ads from the site beginning next month. Natalie Brand reports from the White House.
Twitter's decision to ban all political advertising is fueling a new debate about free speech.
My immediate reaction is it's the wrong move.
Professor Michael Kornfield of George Washington University studies politics on Twitter and calls the company's stance against political ads censorship.
If you envelop a political statement in conversation and dialogue, that's how democracy is supposed to work. And the irony is, it's so easy for Twitter to take this step because it is an interactive medium.
Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey announced the policy change Wednesday, saying in part, while internet advertising is incredibly powerful and very effective for commercial advertisers, that power brings significant risks to politics. The move came as Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg doubled down on his decision not to block political advertising on his platform, even if false or misleading.
In a democracy, I don't think it's right for private companies to censor politicians or the news.
President Trump's re-election campaign blasted Twitter's ad plan, calling it another attempt to silence conservatives, but Democrats largely embraced the decision.
I think Jack Dorsey has stepped up at Twitter and done the right thing that over the long term will actually not limit political debate.
Democratic Senator Mark Warner is among lawmakers who introduced the Honest Ads Act, a proposal to improve transparency of online political ads. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
Coming next, a Republican candidate gets some help. We'll tell you what's in store for congressional candidate Lisa Song Sutton.
Champions kicks off Tuesday at 6. You're watching Politics Now.
Well, the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee has added another Nevada candidate to its Young Guns program. Las Vegas business owner and former Miss Nevada Lisa Song Sutton is running against incumbent Democrat Stephen Horsford for the Congressional District 4 seat. Song Sutton has outraised her Republican primary opponents in the third quarter of this year. The National Republican Congressional Committee has now added her to the program that mentors new candidates and helps fund their campaigns. One of her primary rivals, former Assemblyman Jim Marchant, is also in the program. You can see interviews with both of those candidates on our website. Look for the 2020 interviews section under the News tab. Well, this is What to Watch, where we tell you about some of the things coming up in politics. Nevada's Democratic Party is holding a First in the West dinner on November 18th. So far, 11 of the Democratic presidential candidates have said they will be there, including Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And on Wednesday, the Las Vegas City Council will debate its potential new homeless ordinance. It would criminalize sleeping in tents on sidewalks downtown and in residential areas. The council could vote on the ordinance at its Wednesday meeting. Well, that's our show. Thanks for watching Politics Now. If you have questions about politics, local, state, or national, or suggestions for something you'd like to see on the show, you can email me at sSebelius@8newsnow.com, and you can stay up to date online and watch us right here every Saturday. Finally, happy birthday to Nevada. 155 years. She doesn't look a day over 100. Right now, stay tuned for your local news with Sasha Loftus.